There's all kinds of rules about how you grade green to make sure that you're doing it the right way. And it sounds fussy and it sounds nerdy, and it is for a reason. You want to get everything out of there and count it. So we count each kind of imperfection that we find. Some of them are much more dangerous than others.
Hello, podcast listeners. You are now watching the Health First Coffee Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in again today. Today's episode is about grading coffee, how coffee is judged on its quality and what categories it can fall into and what that means to you, the consumer. Because health standards are not at the top of a lot of consumers' minds right now, but it really should be. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We have the perfect guest for it. With us is 40-plus year coffee industry expert. She's a legend in the specialty coffee game. She helped craft the standards for specialty coffee. Trish Rothgeb joins us now. How's it going, Trish?
Hi. Great. How are you? I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Great to have you on. And with us as well is Ildi Revy, Chief Learning Officer of Purity Coffee. How's it going, Ildi?
Going great. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you both for joining me. I'm very, very excited about this subject today. You know, coffee production, what we cover really comes in two parts. The stuff that happens on the farm, the growing and production side, and then all the rest of the stuff that happens after the coffee is shipped, from the roasting and the packaging and the shipping and all that fun stuff. And today's episode kind of straddles both of those sides. We're talking about the green beans after they're produced, how they're graded, and what happens after that. So, Trish, when it comes to grading coffee, how does coffee grading work? What categories do beans fall into? I think a lot of listeners are familiar with like USDA meat grading, where they'll examine the marbling and the quality, and it'll fall into like 3 different categories: prime, choice, whatever. Does it work like that? How does coffee grading work?
Well, in the United States and largely in the world, we don't have a grading system like meat has, actually. Grading comes in a bunch of different forms and actually is pretty specific to each country that it's either served in or produced in. And so it's kind of a mishmash of things that we grapple with, at least in stateside in the United States. And there's a couple ways we grade coffee. One that I think every coffee lover appreciates now is our ability to taste for quality back of the house, so that when we serve it to we've already screened it for sort of the flavor components we want or the experience we want you to have. But sort of back of the house is a way that we, something we call green grading, or grading of the green raw coffee. And that means picking it out for defect or any inconsistencies. And there's a bunch of reasons to do that. And some of them are rooted in health, and some of them are things that are just cosmetic. Like, do we want the coffee beans to look good? So we'll grade certain things out for the coffee beans to look good. When you open that bag and you see the whole bean, that they all look like coffee in there. So there's a bunch of different levels of this, and it's just a matter of what matters to the coffee company that's serving you and what matters to the person who's buying. But there are some standards that have been set over the years, and they are not by law. They are, again, things that the company or the purveyor of the coffee chooses to put forth as a standard. And in the past, it has been sort of regulated by a few different organizations in some ways, but again, they're totally optional. So the law doesn't require coffee to be of a certain standard at all to be in the mix.
So what kind of categories can coffee fall into? Is there just, we've all heard of specialty coffee. You've played a big role in what specialty coffee means or meant. Is that the only category that it can fall into, specialty or not? Or are there kind of a hierarchy of categories?
There is a bit of a hierarchy. But again, it's not regulated by anyone but our own industry, if that makes sense. And so There isn't a law that is overseeing this. We have in the past been very sort of strict with what is called specialty. And then years ago, there used to be something called premium. So specialty being the highest, premium being mid-range, and then there was something we called commercial. The Specialty Coffee Association years ago did away with the premium and again, this is just their own rules and no one had to follow it, but they sort of
Hmm.
retired the premium level and only went with specialty and not specialty. So dividing
Wow.
specialty from anything else. And at that point, they had the opinion they could only make opinions about specialty and didn't have any interest in talking about anything else. So they just said everything that is not specialty, we don't even talk about. But years and years ago, there was something called premium, which Specialty Coffee Association had created to give producers a stepping stone. So instead of just putting them all in one category as you're not with us, you're not ours, it was like, what are some standards you could get to be premium, in which case you would be opened up to whole book of people who could buy that premium level. And then what is specialty? Specialty has a very strict, at the time when it was put together, is a very, very strict technical standard for specialty, which is,
Hmm.
we often said was aspirational because there were a couple of points where you couldn't possibly make that level, but we kept it there for a while. And now, in these days, specialty is a very loose term. It can be used kind of as a category. It could be used to describe a vanilla latte. It could be used to describe a frosty cream top, cold brew.
Right.
It can be called anything you want. You call it specialty. So the technical term specialty is still very back of the house, meaning professionals use it and they know what they mean when they say it. When you get to a cafe or you get to the grocery shelf and you're looking at the coffee there to choose from, specialty is a very loose term for something special, literally something special.
Look, the thing about specialty coffee is it was created by the Specialty Coffee Association, and they are sort of the authority. Well, they are the authority on it, but they aren't an official authority on it. And what I mean by that is the Specialty Coffee, the SCA, is a trade association. It's basically a membership club. It's not a government agency. It's not an international standards body. It's standard run specialty because the industry gives it its own power. The members choose to adopt it. They train to it and they create certifications which are not accredited by any international body. They're just called that. They share the language, but nobody appointed the SCA as a governmental official body. They're a membership organization.
Right.
So they do have power. It's power by adoption. There is another authority called the Intercontinental Exchange, which is backed by the law. It's backed by international laws, by governments. The ICE Intercontinental Exchange, the ICE Futures US is a regulated exchange. It's a contract market that falls under the Commodity Exchange Act. It answers to a federal agency, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which has its rules and how it grades. So the SCA has nothing like that. There's no federal aid. So to call something specialty can be very vague, or there are lots of gray areas.
Yeah, it's really there is another organization which some people believe is more official but isn't, and that's a small organization called the Coffee Quality Institute that I used to work for in the capacity of working on the Q Grader program, which is about grading coffee on these very strict standards that the Specialty Coffee Association created. And what CQI did was develop testing. And with that, we were able to train thousands and thousands of people all over the world on these standards. So, like Ildi was saying, the only power that SCA standards have are that the industry has adopted them and will move forward with them and creates its own consensus on what is specialty.
Hmm.
So it's a really interesting thing. And I would say that now, because it's a trade organization and people change in and change out, sometimes the sort of mission statement or goals of an organization can change. And I think that that's kind of what happened recently is that now there isn't such a strict idea from the SCA about what is specialty, and they're a lot less interested in those technical things. However, we still have the major I guess population of the industry still work with these understandings of what specialty is. And I would say back when the SCA was pushing the premium, the mid level, they had a lot of first early adopters of having that premium level. And so there are a lot of countries, I can go to certain countries and they will describe some of the lots I'm tasting as premium. Oh, here's a premium
Mm,
lot, here's a specialty lot. So there's still people doing stuff decades later that we can't stop it. Toothpaste is out of the tube. Like things are still happening and people are still working on these ideas.
right.
The new generation is a lot less interested in those standards, and the SCA is now not really pushing those technical standards that they used to push. So who knows how long it'll last? 20 more years of a real strict standard, but unless another one comes through. It's not the end of the world, I would say, because we have a lot of people like Ildi working on these fronts to make sure that there's a greater definition for healthy coffee, high standard coffees, coffees with a really good kind of rubric of quality. There are people who are working on pushing the level higher, whether or not any organization is there to do that for us. We can push for the industry to adopt certain things.
And then what does that mean for a consumer? Like when we're talking about the ice, it's regulated. What does that mean? There are contracts, there's arbitration, there are rules that if a standard isn't met, there are consequences. For specialty, it's because there's no consequences. There's no official rules for it. So for a consumer, when they see the word specialty, what would somebody understand if they saw that now, Trish?
That's the thing is like anything else, like calling a bag of granola natural, it doesn't mean anything. And I think that customers understand what greenwashing is in terms of claiming things to be healthy, claiming things to be natural, claiming things to be whatever. There are certain customers or consumers out there who are just wise to those kind of marketing terms. And so when we say something is specialty, it truly is in the eye of the beholder. And I think that it's if you're loyal to a coffee brand because you love that coffee, there you should pay attention to that. If things don't taste good to you, you could probably track it all the way back to green grading. If things are kind of like not really hitting it in the cup as a consumer, you just move on. You don't ask questions, and that's why we're here. And
Wow.
that's the way consumers are. They pick and choose. They know who to support.
That's amazing. Can we talk about that green grading in specific a little bit? Because I know it has a lot to do with like visual inspections of the beans. You're looking for certain things, certain keys to kind of tune in on. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there are different levels of green grading. In other words, when the coffee is raw, you just pull a sample of it straight out of the bag, the big bag of 155 pounds or whatever it is. You pull a sample. The standards are 350 grams of that sample, and you put it out on a black mat and you look at it with a certain frequency of light actually has to be showing on the mat so that you can see the coffee clearly. There's all kinds of rules about how you grade green to make sure that you're doing it the right way. And it sounds fussy and it sounds nerdy, and it is for a reason. You want to get everything out of there and count it. So we count each kind of imperfection that we find. And there are categories of them, and some of them are much more dangerous than others. Things like mold or sour or rotten coffee seeds are going to have a lot more issues in terms of the cup quality that you get from that, but also possible health issues. But the second grading tier is like cosmetic things like did the coffee bean get broken during processing? Still a good coffee bean, it was broken. Something called immature And there are other reasons where you could get a coffee defect that only gets seen after roasting, which is something that consumers might find, something called a Quaker. When you look at a handful of roasted coffee beans, and there are one or two of them there that look like they're blonde or didn't take roasting like the others did. That's called a Quaker. And if you were to pick that up and eat that, you can actually eat a roasted coffee seed. Pop it in your mouth and chew on it. Take note of that flavor. It'll be a lot like popcorn or nothing like coffee really, but tastes like a roasted kernel of popcorn or something. And that's a Quaker. That's where there's just not enough sugar developed in that seed to develop into roasted sweet coffee. So a roasted flavor doesn't come out because there's just not enough stuff in the raw seed to develop into roasted coffee. So it doesn't. It just
Wow.
comes out as something called Quaker. The Quaker, if there's a high frequency of Quaker in your coffee, you are going to have a popcorny flavored coffee or a nut flavor that you don't like. And it's going to override any other great flavors in that coffee. So Quaker is something that consumers can see. It's not a huge problem unless there's too much of them. If you see one or two, don't call the cops on that. But it's one of the standards in the Specialty Coffee Association specialty sort of schedule of defects that is very strict. You can't have any Quakers to be called specialty. And that is actually the one standard kind of universally in the whole world that coffee professionals sort of turn a blind eye to, because it's really hard to get 0 Quakers in a coffee. It's almost impossible. So I call that particular thing aspirational. So if you're a consumer and you see 1 or 2 Quakers in a full bag of coffee you bought, I wouldn't call the cops. If you open it up and they're all over the place, taste it, make a decision maybe to never buy it again, but if you like it, buy it. Some people actually have told me they like the flavor of Quakers in coffee, which I call BS on. I'm going to call BS on that. They're trying to make excuses for their own bad purchases as green coffee buyers. But we have standards for a reason, and that's not the flavor of the coffee. That's the flavor of the defect. So watch out for Quakers, although don't overreact to them if you have them in your coffee bag. They happen. They're natural.
That's so fascinating. So you're looking for fully developed, mature beans, seeds that have been fully dehusked. You're looking for ones that aren't broken, obviously, chipped, things like that. And then beyond that, what about things like insect damage, like you said, mold? Are those just like pretty obvious to the naked eye? Like that's an easy fail sort of thing?
In roasted, they're not so easy to see, except for brokens are easy to see. Insect damage is something that's pretty hard to see and can also result in Quakers, because if a little borer beetle gets into the coffee, they're just getting in there for the sugars. They're sucking it like a big Slurpee, you know? How do you see an insect damage? They're easier to see in the raw coffee, but it just looks like a little tiny drill hole went in there. 1 or 2 or 3 drill holes. Really damaged, like the whole thing's eaten. Like half the bean will be eaten away, and it'll look like a little miniature mouse just nibbled at it. That is insect damage done by borer beetles. And that might have been infected, things that have fallen to the ground and they sort of lay dormant and come back. So there's a lot of work that has to be done on the farm to keep insect away, but also the climate has changed in such a way that we are seeing much more insect than we did a couple decades ago. If the higher altitudes are getting warmer, the insects have a great time in that climate.
And I'm sure one begets another. You get some insect damage, then it's easier for the pathogens to get in, and things can probably spiral out of control pretty quickly. And then you're left with...
can't see it, as Trish said. You have to, this is where for health grade coffee, the laboratory testing comes in. Because it can look perfectly good, but it could have ochratoxin A or other mycotoxins, which we've talked about in the past.
Okay, so let's get back to roasted coffee. I want to leave the consumers with some really good takeaway tips here. You talk about the green coffee grading, and then it's roasted, and now we're left with a bag of roasted coffee. What can we divine from evaluating a bag of roasted coffee? Like if a listener of this podcast opens up their bag of coffee, what are some signs and keys that they can look for to tell them about quality or lack thereof?
Well, I think the easiest thing to do is to look and smell. So as soon as you open the bag, you look at it and you smell it. More recently, I am able to determine a lot more about the processing of a coffee by opening the bag and smelling it and knowing, oh, if this is not a co-ferment, it's an anaerobic. I'm just learning about these smells that come off of certain processes of coffee that are sort of new and innovative. So you can get a sense of a coffee if it's very fruity by the smell of the roasted coffee. So a very fruited coffee in the olden days used to be a very bad thing. Um, but now the kids are loving the fruited coffees quite a lot. And so people like me who've been in the business forever, I'm like stretching myself to learn and be open to new things. But a blueberry flavor or a blueberry note in the aroma was always considered when I was learning back in the day as a bad thing. Now it's a selling point, and now it's a specialty
Mm.
coffee. And that's how quickly this is over the course of 20 years, which is relatively short span of time for a whole industry to sort of, it's like essentially turning on a dime to be able to say what was once considered a terrible thing to smell when you open the bag is now considered, now I'm putting dollars and dollars on that green coffee. I can sell it for more if I have that attribute.
Oh my
So
gosh, isn't that funny? What is that process, if you don't mind me asking? If you're smelling those fruity notes, what are you smelling?
well, when it's done well, it's elegant and delicious. When it's done poorly, it's sour and like rotten fruit. It'll taste out like rotten fruit. And so I'm at the stage now where I'm accepting the elegant ones and the well done ones, and every day I'm pushing the envelope to get myself to enjoy the more fruited ones after being told for a good 30 years of my life that a blueberry note is a bad idea on a coffee.
Mhm.
But you would open it, it would smell like fruit that is ripe and usually comes off as a blueberry note. That is a process, generally, it's a natural process, although there are so many different processes being used today, it's hard to even define some of them. But the more classic is a natural where the fruit is picked off the tree and dried entirely inside the fruit. The seed is dried entirely
Oh,
inside the fruit and not washed at all. In fact, they call it natural because it's the fermentation happening naturally under the skin. That's why it's called natural. And they just lay it out either on a patio or most often on raised beds so the air can circulate from underneath and dry it over a longer period of time. And they used to call it sun-dried coffee because they would put it right in the sun to go way past raisin stage into little hard nugget stage, and then when it gets fully, dried out, they mill it all at one time, so all of the parchment and all the fruit come off at the same time in milling.
wow.
And that usually, when done well, makes for a very fruity coffee because the fruit sitting on the seed imparts its flavor, right, infuses it right into the seed. Yeah, it's lovely when it's done well. When it's not done well, it can taste like rotten fruit, and you'll have activity, too much activity of the acidity we don't like. Sours is something we can find in a green coffee grating. It's when the coffee seed looks like amber or all the way through any stage of brown or gold into a rotten stage of dark brown. This is a sour coffee that has gone way past rotting, either in the washing tank or any other way. And that's always going to make for acetic acid, which we don't enjoy in coffee.
But this is where we're shifting now to the health first coffee, is that consumers are like, I just want a really good basic coffee I can drink every day that I know is healthy, is delicious, so I start my day right. But I don't need to be analyzing flavors or having an experience every morning. I just want to drink a good healthy coffee every morning, something I know that I'm starting my day right with my ritual, and then just move on with my life.
A satisfying cup of coffee. What's better than that. And at this point, it's still rooted in some classic flavors, because people are
Mhm.
kind of attuned to that. Who knows what it'll look like in 30 years? And by then, I'll hopefully be retired and just sitting around hating all the coffee the kids
Drink
bring me to taste. I'm just kidding. No.
Drinking coffee on the moon. Am I right? So I love that breakdown of natural dried coffee, changing those flavors, bringing on fruit notes that were once considered taboo. That's very interesting that you can determine what happened in the past from looking and tasting that roasted coffee. What else can we divine from a bag of roasted coffee, whether it's the oil levels on it or how it looks or what have you?
Yeah, so a coffee, I think by now consumers know there are different levels of roast, and if you roast longer or hotter or longer and hotter, you'll have a dark roasted coffee, and that brings the oils to the surface of the coffee, and that is very much a taste preference. People love dark roasted coffee for a good reason. Our body craves it for a reason, but we'll get to that on another discussion. But dark roasted coffee is more oily, which means that you as a consumer have a little bit less time to use it because the oils can oxidize and they're exposed to the air. If it's a dark roasted coffee, it doesn't mean it's a bad quality coffee, but not usually going to get a dark roasted coffee from a very high end specialty coffee. So roasters like me are not going to spend a bunch of money on a really beautiful coffee that costs more and I'm in competition with other roasters to buy it, a small rare lot of very good tasting coffee. I'm not going to roast that dark. It's not to say that all dark roasted coffee is cheap. I'm not saying that at all. And then to roast it darker, what you're doing there is you're using the roast as the flavor profile. It almost doesn't matter where it comes from, so long as it's defect free, which is what we hope it would be. And then roast it as dark as you want to hit that. But you don't care where, it doesn't matter if it comes from Guatemala or it comes from Brazil, or it's not going to matter what variety it is. In other words, is it a Bourbon variety? Is it a Caturra variety? No one cares. It's the roast that matters there. And if you're that person, you're going to enjoy that coffee. And there is a good way to roast dark coffee, and there are bad ways to roast dark coffee. So not all dark roasted coffee, even though it will have very similar flavor components, it will have some, if they're not done well, will lose sweetness entirely because they've just been obliterated with roast. And there's a way to roast that well. Um,
Wow.
same difference with the super light roasted coffee. Super light roasted coffee are what people are going to do with their high end coffee. So if you go to a roastery, buy a bag of coffee, it's super, super, super expensive. Let's say you splash out for something and you want to try it. Go out on a limb and try something that's light roasted. That can also be done poorly as well. You can under roast a coffee just because you're so afraid to touch it with the heat, that you've invested in this coffee as a roaster and you just don't want to mess it up. So you end up under roasting it, which in my opinion is just as bad. And everyone should consider it just as bad because what you get are greenish flavors, starchy flavors. You know what happens when you leave that corn on the cob in your fridge for too long and you eventually get to it sort of starchy? It lost all the sweetness because all the sugars have converted back into starches and it's like not
Right.
a fresh corn flavor. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but the
Yeah,
sweetness is
absolutely.
sort of it's more starchy, it's more greenish.
It tastes like a raw potato when you
Right,
bite
it's
into it.
vegetal, it's very
Yeah.
vegetal. So in that way, you've lost your investment as a roaster as well.
But the longer you're roasting, you're narrowing down the nuances that come from the plant. They all start to kind of taste the same in the end, is what you're saying
Yeah.
with those heavy, heavy roasts. So when you're seeing that oil layer in coffee, you're seeing that heavy roast. And like you said, maybe that's what you like, but the lighter roasts are exhibiting more of the nuances of the plants themselves. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, it's a dance you do as a roaster. You have to decide how much of the roast is going to play a part in the cup, your final cup that you want, and how much of the coffee that's came inherent to the green is gonna come through, and that's your point of view. You have to create a point of view on coffee.
Sometimes these roast levels can give you an indication of what's in the coffee health-wise. For example, the lighter roasted coffees retain more of the chlorogenic acids, which are the antioxidant compounds. As we darker roast it, those break apart and they turn into other compounds. Some are also impactful for health. So you wouldn't have the antioxidant activity, but you may have other activity. And we'll talk about that in another episode. But as we bring this together, talking about roasting in coffee and flavors and all of that, the flavors can also be an indicator for you of what's in the health also.
That's a good point. And so on that note, I'd really like to ask Trish and both of you, being that health is not at the top of a lot of coffee consumers' mind at this point, still stuck on this idea of like price, really, and then taste, obviously. The health grade standard should be something that consumers are thinking about, and this is why it's so amazing the work that you're doing, Ildi. But what do you think about that, Trish? Is that a realistic assessment? And how can we get health at the forefront, or at least in the running, when it comes to buying factors for the average consumer?
When it comes to what the consumer is coming up against, like buying a bag of coffee that is from a reputable company, they've done the work to buy high qualities, and you can find that out. That is going to keep you as safe as you can be at this point. But as we develop these standards that Ildi can speak better to, and get them adopted, that's the whole thing. Everybody has learned from the past, and they know what works to sell coffee, and they know what works to keep it healthy for people. But there's a lot more to learn. There's a lot more testing and stuff to be done. And at this point, we are just kind of behind it because we're so enthralled with just innovating that we're not sure how healthy we're being.
And do you want to speak on that a little bit, Ildi, which is the food safety and the lack of bad things in healthy coffee is important, but it's also just kind of the starting ground. Beyond that, what does health grade coffee look like?
That's why this green grading episode, I really wanted Trish to guide us through it, because she is an expert on grading green coffee. That's something the industry has done visually to take out the bad stuff. There's a whole chemistry aspect of it that does need lab testing that you can't see. So the industry is aware that they want to have higher quality, and as they grade out the bad stuff, you're grading out the health problems. So we're putting in this description, the visual standards that Trish talked about, but also there's a column in there that says what the health impact of that visual standard is. So the industry was on the right track by grading these things out, like for flavor, but also for health. So as Trish says, when you're buying a really well-chosen bag of coffee that the people are doing their due diligence and grading, they're grading these for health, even though they may not know it. So that's the first page. It matches those. But on the second page are just some suggested starting points for possible standards as we want to create health coffee for a category, that we do want something that is a yes or no, that is, either meets the standard or doesn't meet the standard.
Pass or fail.
As we talked earlier, as the industry sort of becomes more flexible in its definition of specialty, for health, we don't want to do that. So that's in the description. And then I also put together, it's in my book also, is a poster people can print out and have, and they can look at what these defects look like. And it's just kind of a fun way of really learning about these.
That's really cool, Ildi. I appreciate you putting that together, because the listeners are going to really appreciate seeing the link between defects and then health concerns that are graded out. That's why I wanted to do this episode. And Trish, thank you so much. This was a great overview of specialty and what that means, of the grading process, and even of how people can look at their own roasted coffee and make assessments about it visually. Would you like to leave us with any parting words when it comes to quality coffee, healthy coffee, specialty coffee? What can the listeners take away here at the end to wrap up this episode, Trish?
I think that when it comes to coffee, get to know your favorite brand, ask questions, keep yourself open to new things. But there's so much to learn about these new processes and the wild flavors and how people are making those flavors happen. We're not really sure what's going on out there, and we're experts. So I would say hold the line on what you think is specialty, open yourself up to new things, but then hold people accountable and ask questions about what you're putting in your body. It's common sense for kind of everything we eat, right? Find out where it came from, how it was made, and support what you appreciate.
That's fantastic, Trish. Absolutely love it. Where can our audience find more of you and more of your work?
We're Wrecking Ball Coffee, Wrecking Ball Coffee Roasters in San Francisco. You can find me on Instagram at Trish Rothgeb, one word. I have a Substack called Good Coffee with Trish Rothgeb. And sometimes I write on there, as well as Ildi and I are trying to write more on our Substacks. And otherwise, I'm just out there. I guess you can follow me mostly on Instagram is probably the best way to find me.
Wrecking Ball Coffee, everybody. Trish Rothgeb, thank you so much. This was an awesome episode. Listeners, I know that you loved that one. Make sure to hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this episode with a friend. We love when you share the Health First Coffee podcast. Stay tuned. We got more coming at you. But until then, that's all for now. This is Jordan River, Ildi Revi, and Trish Rothgeb signing off, wishing you an extraordinary rest of your day. We'll see you next time on the Health First Coffee podcast. Bye, everybody.